There comes a moment in life when everything feels heavy, not because life is against you, but because you've been carrying too much for too long, too many expectations, too many disappointments, too many thoughts that don't let you sleep peacefully at night. And in that moment, something inside you quietly whispers, not to give up, but to reset. Is not failure. It is permission. Permission to stop running on a path that is draining you and finally ask yourself, is this even where I want to go? You don't need to have it all figured out today. You don't need to prove anything to anyone right now. You just need one honest decision to restart your life with intention instead of exhaustion. Because truth is, you are not stuck. You are just overwhelmed. And overwhelmed people don't need more pressure, they need clarity. They need silence from the noise outside and inside their head long enough to hear their own thoughts again. Resetting your life doesn't mean erasing your past. It means learning from it without letting it define your future. Every mistake you made, every wrong turn, every delay, you don't throw it away. You extract wisdom from it and move forward lighter, not bitter. There is something powerful about admitting, I don't like where I am, but I can change direction. That is where transformation begins. Not in perfection, but in honesty. And when you restart, don't restart with the same mindset that broke you. That's the mistake most people make. They change their routine, but not their thinking. They change their environment, but not their habits. They move physically, but mentally, they are still carrying the same fear, doubt, and self-talk. Rebuild yourself from the inside first. Start with your thoughts. Because your thoughts are not just words in your head, they are instructions your life follows. If you keep telling yourself you are behind, your mind will make you feel behind. If you keep saying nothing works for you, your mind will stop trying. But if you start telling yourself, I am learning, I'm improving, I'm not finished yet, something begins to shift quietly but powerfully. You don't need to be extreme, you just need to be consistent. Small actions repeated daily become identity. You don't become strong in one moment. You become strong in thousands of small decisions where you chose discipline over distraction. Restart your mornings. Even if your life is messy, your morning doesn't have to be. Wake up and decide what kind of person you are becoming. Not what you feel like today, but what you are committed to becoming. Feelings change every hour, but commitment builds destiny. Refocus your energy. Because right now, your attention is probably scattered everywhere. On people who don't value you, on outcomes you can't control, on fears that haven't even happened yet. Bring it back to what you can control, your effort, your reaction, your next step. You don't need to fix your entire life today. You only need to focus on what is in front of you right now. One task, one decision, one step forward. That's how momentum is built. And when you feel like quitting, remember this, the version of you that you are trying to become is on the other side of consistency, not motivation. Motivation will not always be there, but discipline will carry you when motivation disappears. Rebuild yourself slowly, but rebuild yourself correctly. Don't rush the process just to feel better temporarily. Growth that lasts is uncomfortable at first. They ask you to let go of old habits that feel safe, but are keeping you stuck. There will be days when you don't feel strong. On those days, don't rely on strength, rely on structure. Do what you say you would do, even if you do it imperfectly, because showing up imperfectly is still progress. Quitting is the only real failure. And remember, your past version of you did the best they could with what they knew. But you know more now. You see more now. Not the version of you that is trying to meet expectations or keep up appearances, but the version of you that knows when something feels right or wrong. Over time, people lose touch with that inner clarity because they are too focused on external pressure. A reset brings you back to that internal voice. It helps you notice what drains you and what energizes you, what aligns with you and what pulls you away from yourself. That awareness is powerful because it becomes the foundation for better decisions moving forward. Resetting is not about doing everything differently overnight. It is about giving yourself permission to start small again without shame. You do not need a perfect plan to begin. You only need honesty about where you are and willingness to move forward differently. Even the smallest shift in direction can completely change where you end up over time. What matters is not the speed of the restart, but the clarity behind it. In reality, most breakthroughs in life do not come from nonstop effort. They come from moments where people stop, reflect, and choose a new direction with more awareness than before. The reset is that moment. It is the quiet decision to stop surviving on autopilot and start living with intention again. The past has a way of staying alive in the mind long after the events themselves are over. It does not exist as something physical anymore, but it continues to influence how you think, how you react, and how you see yourself. Many people unknowingly carry versions of themselves that no longer match who they are today. They keep returning to old mistakes, old failures, old regrets, and old versions of identity as if those moments are still actively defining them. But what is often forgotten is that experience is not identity. What you went through is not who you are meant to remain. Every person makes decisions in life that they wish they could redo. Every person has moments where they acted out of fear, confusion, pressure, or lack of knowledge. That is part of being human. But the mind has a tendency to exaggerate those moments and build a story around them that feels permanent. One mistake becomes "I always fail." One setback becomes "a nothing works for me." One wrong decision becomes "I am not capable." These are not truths, but interpretations repeated so often that they start to feel real. The danger is not the past itself, but the identity that forms around how the past is interpreted. What you need to understand is that your past was shaped by who you were at that time, with the level of awareness, emotional strength, and knowledge you had then. You made decisions based on limited perspective, not permanent character. As you grow, your understanding expands. And with that expansion comes a responsibility to stop judging your present self through the limitations of your past self. If you continue to define yourself by earlier versions of who you were, you trap yourself in a cycle where growth feels impossible because your identity never gets updated. Letting go of the past does not mean denying or pretending it did not happen. It means refusing to allow it to dictate your future direction. There is a difference between remembering and reliving. Remembering is awareness. Reliving is emotional imprisonment. Many people relive their past every time they hesitate, every time they doubt themselves, every time they try to take a step forward, but hear an internal voice that says, "You have failed before, you will fail again." That voice is not wisdom, it is repetition of old pain. You are not required to carry every version of yourself into the future. Some versions of you are necessary for a season, but are not meant to stay. The version of you that struggled, the version of you that lacked direction, the version of you that made mistakes without knowing better. Those versions serve their time. Holding on to them as identity only slows down the evolution of who you are becoming now. Growth requires release. You cannot move forward while emotionally anchored to what you have already outgrown. It is also important to recognize how the past becomes heavier when it is tied to shame. Shame convinces you that your mistakes are not just actions, but reflections of who you are at your core. This is one of the most limiting beliefs a person can carry. Because once you believe you are your worst moment, you stop trying to become anything better. But in reality, mistakes are feedback, not definitions. They show what did not work, not what you are destined to be. When you stop identifying with your past mistakes, something shifts internally. You begin to see yourself as someone who is still developing rather than someone who has already decided. That shift opens space for new decisions. It allows you to act without being mentally dragged down by previous outcomes. It creates room for experimentation, learning, and rebuilding confidence step by step. There is also freedom in understanding that other people's opinions about your past do not determine your future. People may remember you based on old versions of yourself, but they are not responsible for your growth. You are. You wait for external validation to release your past identity, you will remain stuck in it longer than necessary. Growth often requires you to move forward even when others still associate you with who you used to be. What truly matters is whether you are willing to stop revisiting the same emotional patterns tied to your history. Because every time you repeat those patterns, you reinforce the belief that you cannot change. But change is not a sudden event. It is a series of new choices made from a different perspective. And that perspective only becomes available When you stop allowing your past to define your limits. You are not required to forget what happened, but you are required to stop letting it decide what happens next. The way a person thinks quietly shapes everything about their life long before any visible change ever appears. Every action, every habit, every decision is first formed in the mind as a belief, an assumption, or a perspective about what is possible. This is why changing circumstances without changing thinking often leads to temporary results that eventually collapse back into old patterns. If the internal system remains the same, the external life eventually returns to match it. Real transformation does not begin with effort alone. It begins with perception. Most people try to fix their lives by focusing only on what they can see. They try to change routines, environments, or goals without ever questioning the thoughts that created their current reality. But those thoughts operate like instructions running in the background. If a person constantly thinks in terms of limitation, doubt, or fear, their behavior will naturally align with those beliefs, even if they consciously want something different. This is why two people with the same opportunity can end up with completely different outcomes. It's not just about talent or luck. It is about the internal narrative each person carries. The mind is always interpreting experiences, and those interpretations become identity over time. If you repeatedly interpret challenges as signs of weakness, your mind begins to label you as someone who cannot handle pressure. If you interpret setbacks as permanent failures, your mind begins to expect failure before effort is even made. These interpretations are not fixed truths. They are patterns that can be rewritten, while rewriting them requires awareness first. You cannot change what you refuse to observe. Changing mindset is not about forcing positive thoughts over negative ones. That approach often fails because it ignores the deeper structure underneath thinking. Instead, it is about questioning the validity of long-held beliefs. Other days you feel drained, distracted, and unsure of even the smallest task. So if your progress depends only on motivation, then your progress will always be unstable. It will move in cycles of starting and stopping, rising and falling, depending on how you feel in the moment. That is why many people begin strong but struggle to maintain consistency over time. Discipline, however, is not emotional. It is structural. It is the ability to do what needs to be done regardless of how you feel in the moment. It is not about intensity. It is about consistency. When you rely on discipline, you remove the need to constantly negotiate with your emotions. You stop asking whether you feel like doing something and start focusing on whether it needs to be done. That shift may sound simple, but it changes everything about how progress is created. Small actions are often underestimated because they do not feel powerful in the moment. A single page of reading, a short workout, a focused hour of work, a simple decision to avoid distraction. These things seem insignificant when viewed individually. But life is not shaped by single actions. It is shaped by repeated actions. When small actions are repeated consistently, they accumulate into identity. You do not become disciplined in one decision. You become disciplined in hundreds of small decisions that no one else sees. The mind naturally seeks big results because they provide immediate emotional satisfaction. But growth does not operate on emotional satisfaction. It operates on repetition. Every skill, every achievement, every transformation is the result of something done repeatedly over time. Even the most successful people you see did not reach their level through occasional bursts of effort. They reached it through routines that became non-negotiable parts of their life. Consistency is powerful because it removes randomness from your progress. When you are inconsistent, every restart feels heavy. You keep returning to the beginning because there is no continuous flow. But when you are consistent, even in small ways, you maintain momentum. And momentum reduces resistance. What once felt difficult becomes familiar. What once required effort becomes automatic. That is how habits are formed, not through intensity, but through repetition. One of the most important realizations in personal growth is that progress is often invisible in the short term. People quit not because they are not improving, but because they cannot see improvement quickly enough. They expect immediate evidence that their effort is working. But most meaningful changes happen beneath the surface, long before they become visible. Your discipline today may not show results tomorrow, but it is shaping the structure of your future self. There is also a psychological shift that happens when you commit to small, consistent actions. Instead of seeing yourself as someone trying to change, you start seeing yourself as someone who is already changing. This identity shift is subtle but powerful. You are no longer depending on motivation to start. You are following a pattern that already exists. And once a pattern is established, breaking it becomes harder than maintaining it. The key is to lower the threshold of action while raising the standard of consistency. Many people fail because they aim too high too quickly, become overwhelmed, and then stop completely. But when the focus is on small, manageable actions, the barrier to starting becomes low. And once starting becomes easy, consistency becomes possible. Over time, these small actions compound into significant change that feels almost effortless in hindsight. Discipline is not about punishment or forcing yourself into suffering. It is about choosing long-term benefit over short-term comfort repeatedly. It is about understanding that every small decision is either building your future or delaying it. There is no neutral ground. This shift does not remove challenges, but it removes unnecessary mental weight. There is also a practical benefit to this approach. When energy is concentrated on controllable actions, results naturally improve over time. Not because outcomes are directly controlled, but because the quality of effort increases. Clear focus leads to better decisions, better execution, and better consistency. This creates a chain effect where small improvements accumulate into significant progress. Letting go of uncontrollable concerns does not mean ignoring reality or becoming passive. It means becoming selective about where mental effort is invested. It is possible to be aware of outcomes without being consumed by them. It is possible to care about results without letting them dictate emotional state. This balance is what allows sustained effort without burnout. The more a person practices returning attention to what they can influence, the stronger their sense of internal control becomes. This creates resilience. Instead of being emotionally shaken by every external shift, there is stability rooted in personal action. Even when circumstances are uncertain, there is confidence in the fact that effort is still available, choices are still possible, and direction is still in your hands. In the end, energy is one of the most valuable resources a person has. Once it is spent, it cannot be fully recovered in the same form. Wasting it on uncontrollable things slowly leaks in progress and pride. But when it is protected and directed toward what can actually be influenced, life begins to feel more structured, more manageable, and more purposeful, even in the presence of uncertainty. Real growth is rarely a sudden transformation that happens overnight. It is usually a slow process that unfolds quietly, often without immediate recognition or reward. People tend to imagine rebuilding their life as something dramatic, where everything changes quickly and clearly. But in reality, meaningful change is built in layers. It happens in small decisions repeated over time, in moments where you choose to continue even when progress feels invisible, and in patience that allows results to develop at their own pace rather than forcing them to appear quickly. One of the hardest parts of rebuilding yourself is accepting that progress does not always feel like progress. There are days when you put in effort and see no visible difference. There are periods where you feel like you are doing everything right, but nothing seems to be changing. During these moments, many people lose confidence and assume that their efforts are not working. But growth often operates beneath perception before it becomes visible. Just because something cannot be seen yet does not mean it is not happening. Rebuilding step by step requires a shift in expectation. Instead of expecting immediate results, the focus shifts toward consistency of direction. Every action taken in the right direction adds to the foundation, even if the structure is not yet visible. Think of it like building something layer by layer. The foundation must be strong before anything noticeable can stand on it. If too much pressure is placed on speed, the structure becomes unstable. But when time is allowed for proper development, the result becomes more durable and lasting. Patience is often misunderstood as waiting without action, but real patience is active. It is continuing to show up, continuing to improve, and continuing to move forward even when the outcome is not yet visible. It is resisting the urge to quit simply because results are delayed. Most people underestimate how long meaningful change actually takes, especially when they are trying to undo years of habits, thinking patterns, or emotional conditioning. Rebuilding is not about rushing the process, but about respecting it. There is also an emotional aspect to rebuilding that requires acceptance. As you change, you may not feel completely confident in your new direction at first. You may still carry doubts, hesitation, or uncertainty. That is normal. Growth does not begin with full confidence. Confidence is often the result of repeated action. You act first, then evidence builds, and then confidence follows. Waiting to feel ready before taking action often delays progress unnecessarily. Another important part of rebuilding is learning to stay committed even when motivation fades. Motivation is unreliable because it depends on emotional state, and emotional states constantly change. Some days you feel energized, other days you feel drained. If rebuilding depends on motivation, it becomes inconsistent. But when it is based on commitment, it becomes stable. Commitment means continuing even when it feels slow, even when it feels repetitive, and even when there is no immediate reward. The step-by-step nature of rebuilding also means that setbacks are part of the process, not interruption. There will be moments where you fall back into old habits or make mistakes. Instead of seeing these as complete failure, they should be seen as feedback. Every setback shows where adjustments are needed. The key is not avoiding mistakes entirely, but reducing the time spent away from progress and returning to the path quickly without self-judgment. Over time, small, consistent efforts begin to compound. What once felt difficult becomes familiar. What once required conscious effort becomes automatic. This is how identity begins to shift. You are no longer trying to change. You begin to operate differently because repetition has created a new pattern. This gradual transformation is often overlooked because it does not feel dramatic, but it is the most stable form of change. Rebuilding step by step also teaches resilience. When you commit to gradual progress, you learn how to continue despite imperfection. You stop expecting perfect conditions before acting. You stop waiting for ideal motivation. Instead, you learn to work with what is available in the present moment. This adaptability becomes a strength that carries forward into all areas of life. There's a quiet power in not rushing your own growth. When you allow yourself to develop at a natural pace, you reduce internal pressure and create space for clarity. You begin to see that progress is not about how fast you move, but about whether you are still moving in the right direction. Even slow progress, when consistent, eventually leads to meaningful change. In the end, rebuilding yourself is not a single decision, but a continuous process. It is made up of ordinary days, small actions, repeated efforts, and quiet persistence. And while it may not always feel significant in the moment, over time it creates a version of you that is stronger, more stable, and more aligned with the life you are trying to build. And in the end, what truly matters is not how fast you change, but how steadily you refuse to give up on yourself. Every small effort, every quiet decision, every step taken in uncertainty has been building you in ways you may not notice yet. One day when you look back, you will realize that the slow progress, the patient rebuilding, and the consistent effort were never wasted. They were shaping you, strengthening you, and guiding you toward a version of yourself that is more focused, more grounded, and more resilient than before.